Hey guys, my name is Steve Richert. I am a photographer and filmmaker of the adventure variety predominantly, and this is my Friday night live stream where I am taking your questions, answering them as best I can, all about the wonderful world of light and fast and hopefully simple storytelling. So I do this every Friday night where I stream here from my closet, and I'm happy to be chatting with you guys this evening. And tonight, what I want to start off talking about, and of course we can, talk about a variety of different topics based on what you guys have interested in. But what I wanted to talk about tonight a little bit was kind of getting started in photography and video, and for lack of a better term, I like to summarize this as digital storytelling, because when I got started in photography, there was really not a gap in between photo and video for me, and I suspect this may be the case with a lot of you guys as well, that we always think of video as being kind of this one thing, and I think for a lot of people that started shooting back in the days, even early digital and certainly before that when it was film, where things were very much like you're either a still photographer or you are a videographer or cinematographer. And the way I got started, and I think this is one of the real benefits of the way that technology has been going digitally now, is that there really isn't a line dividing photo and video, at least not as clearly as there used to be. And certainly, a lot of the cameras, they are optimized more towards video or stills. But to a large extent, those things can happen now interchangeably. And one of the things that I've tried to do and that I'm interested in doing really moving forward is really reaching out to people who are just getting started, or who maybe know their way around a camera well enough to take a photo or take a video, but are kind of looking to take that next step in terms of really putting it together and saying, okay, I can take a decent picture with decent exposure. I know how to, get different effects in my images, and I know how to compose shots basically, and I know what good lighting versus awful lighting looks like. Now what can I do with that? And I want to talk tonight a little bit, of course, pending any questions that you guys have. And anybody who's watching this stream after it's no longer live, of course, you can always leave comments down below and I will answer them, because I try to be really communicative here. Is kind of talking a little bit about getting started and how I got started. And as you guys join the stream here, I would love to hear how some of you guys found your way into this. And I haven't been doing storytelling, digital storytelling, for a very long time. I've been doing it for about 6 years or 7 years, really 5 years seriously. And for me, everything started from a standpoint of having a story to tell and then trying to find the best way to share that story. And so basically 5 years ago or so, I had an idea to do a project where I would live on the road and share my experience of my life with type 1 diabetes. I've had this chronic illness since I was 16 years old. I'm 34 now. And it's been a big part of my life, and it's something that is kind of challenging to live with in some ways, but it's also something that's given me some really important perspective on life, that as hard and as expensive as it is living with a chronic illness, like, I don't think I would trade the lessons that I've learned and who that's made me. And so my idea was 5 years ago to say, I want to show other people kind of that this can be a different way to look at a struggle or look at a chronic illness. And it was kind of a weird story. I'm a climber, and I wanted to make a project, a long-term, which I didn't know it at that time, but it would be considered, I guess, a documentary project about living an adventurous life with a very limiting chronic illness, and kind of that strange crossroads between those two things. And of course, things that are that niche and that specific, who's going to come along and pay you to go do that and, give you a film crew or a photographer? So I said, all right, well, I'm going to have to figure out a way to do this for myself. And I started by, asking and trying to pitch to companies for sponsorship. And they were all like, what? What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. It's crazy. And this was in the days of reality TV. And it's funny I say in the days of, because I don't know if people still, like when Jersey Shore was a thing, when people were watching Jersey Shore. And I remember like, feeling like, oh, this is the end of our society. People are, the Jersey Shore is like the thing that people are into and that they watch. But I started to get an inkling, and of course, I completely missed the boat on vlogging, like the golden age of vlogging, and when that was kind of like took over that momentum from reality TV, and it was right at the time when I was getting started, and that was a huge, huge mistake on my part. Well, maybe not a huge mistake, but it was a mistake that I made. And so I said, yeah, I gotta do this myself. I'm gonna figure out a way to tell this story. And I knew just basically how to take photographs. I knew that composition was a thing. I had some friends that were photographers or whatever, and that's really how I started. It was that I had this story that I wanted to share, and I knew that in this year, this project that I had, I was going to live out of my car for an entire year, and I wanted to make a documentary to be able to share this experience, and so I was blogging with the blog, written blogging, and I was doing that while taking photographs, and so that was kind of the ongoing thing. And in the meantime, I was just shooting a whole bunch of video, and my hope was that I would get this Hail Mary pass from some sponsor that would come along and give me enough money to hire an editor, and then I would be able to take all the video that I had shot, which was, I knew how to hold a camera still and push the button and expose things, but I didn't know anything about, what I was shooting or why, other than this could be interesting later, so I'm gonna just shoot a bunch of stuff. And eventually I had to learn how to edit as part of this whole process, but the whole thing really started through just still photography and the desire to share the places that I was going and my motivations and my experiences on a very rudimentary level. And at no point was it something where I was, thinking, oh, I'm going to be a professional photographer, I'm going to ever be good enough to offer my services in exchange for money. It was just like, this is something that I want to do. I want to be able to have better pictures. And of course, spending the majority of the time that I was doing this project, I was, living on the road out of a car and traveling for 365 days straight. And it was kind of an arbitrary challenge that I made up for myself to be able to showcase this different perspective about the chronic illness of that type 1 diabetes that I was living with. But it was very much travel and adventure oriented and climbing, and I wanted to really give people that sense of what I was doing and where I was, and also, frankly, for myself to be able to have a really nice record of that thing to be able to share. And that's what brought me into digital storytelling. And of course, after a year of climbing and shooting, I had a lot of pictures, and I felt fairly decent by the end of that year in terms of editing the photos. Was complete fish out of water in terms of editing the video, but there again, it was like, well, I don't have anybody else that can do this for me, but how hard can it be? And that was always my approach, for better or worse, to any of this stuff. Was like, there's a certain extent to which you see these things and it's like, oh, that's photographers, that's like Nat Geo, and video filmmakers, that's like Sundance, and going to the movie theaters. Like, I can't do that. But then when you start to approach it from that standpoint of, well, maybe I can, what is something that I can do, and let me work from there, and sort of with an ignorance is bliss mentality, but with the whole object being a story that I wanted to document and that I wanted to share. And then, of course, from that point up until now, my style of filmmaking and photography, which again, I look at those two things for me as being one and the same, not literally the same, but those are two completely intertwined pursuits, because every time I go out to shoot video, I'm always taking stills. Every time I'm taking stills, I always want to take video too, because there's a really nice interplay and variety that you have there. But documentary style is kind of what came to me, because when you're shooting in a documentary style, you have the ability to get a little bit of forgiveness from your audience if you don't necessarily have everything completely perfect, because the whole point of documentary style is that you're documenting a thing that happened, and there is built into that concept the idea that, well, you're working under pressure and you're working under real circumstances. There's realism built in. Hi there, Queen of San Joaquin. Good to see you here. Yeah, I'm back at my later time. My wife and I decided to go out for dinner, so I was trying to do the live streams a little bit early last week, and this week I'm back to closer to my 11 p.m. time. But the whole purpose of documentary storytelling is that you have forgiveness for the reality and the realism, and so the things that you would ordinarily look at as being like, I'm not crazy about that, that's inconsistent, I'm not happy with it, there is an allowance made for that. And for me, that made it like the perfect venue in which to start off, because I wasn't as worried about failing. And so, that is in short order, that's how I got into photography and storytelling. And I think that, that is something that may be relevant to a lot of you guys as people on YouTube, because more and more people on YouTube, I think, are finding their way to that concept of digital storytelling without asking for permission or trying for perfection, but just have something that they want to say, or have something that they want to document, or both, maybe. And I think that's a really amazing thing, and that's one of the reasons, many reasons, why I'm really excited and thankful to be here on YouTube and to have a community of folks like you guys to spitball ideas with, and to hopefully inspire people when it comes to making moves or making steps in terms of whether it's filmmaking or photography. And again, to me, I look at those two things as being very symbiotic, because definitely the things that I've learned in still photography have helped me immensely in filmmaking, and the things I learned in filmmaking have also, in the ways that they're the same and in the ways that they're different, they inform each other a lot. And I think the days of having to say, oh, I only shoot stills, I don't care about video, or vice versa, I think those days are kind of gone, or at least in the world in which I operate and the way I look at things. Recently I have been working on acquiring some clients and doing some business, kind of taking my creative stuff that I've been working on here on YouTube and turning that into a career that's full-time. And I've done, I've sold video footage. Actually, for my very first project, I was very fortunate to get picked up by Procter & Gamble, a small outfit out of Cincinnati. Mom and pop pharmaceutical and medical household goods. Procter & Gamble makes everything. Johnson and Johnson, like one of their companies, they make Colgate toothpaste, I think, and like everything. And they actually own Duracell, and Duracell had a partner with a company that make blood sugar testers, and they heard about my project, and being very niche in the world of diabetes, but kind of this off-the-wall, extreme, quote-unquote, sports personality that I was, it made a really cool opportunity for me to sell some of my footage there and have a really, really nice partnership and be able to create some stuff. And that kind of gave me an inkling of, stories can really be worth something to the right people. And that it's not necessarily about being able to have like a huge CV that says, I shot for this and that, and I'm, all these credentials, but as much as it is having something that you're doing that you believe in, that is interesting and that is unique, and that, and I think those things go together, unique and things that you believe in, because, I definitely want to make more videos about this in the coming weeks, but I think there's a large extent to which style and your vision and the things that are people always try to develop, I think that a lot of that is really innate. It has to do with who you are. And the biggest selling point to me, and challenges, hey Steve, yes, living in the vertical closet, and it is, it is definitely that. one of the big selling points to why I always try to encourage people to start a YouTube channel, to, really get into photography, to get a camera, start sharing their stories, because the camera really does look both ways. It does give us an opportunity to really take a position on who we are and what it is that we have to say to the world. Like, that's what everything ultimately grows from. And I think today, a lot of times, I see a lot of people between Instagram and YouTube and like the camera reviewers that are all like, hip to the specs, and just like everything is about specs and who's got the fastest autofocus and the highest frame rate, which, let's face it, it's Sony. As much as, some of us like to bag on Sony. I don't bag on Sony, but I think that by making such huge advances in technology, they kind of have drawn out this idea that the technical specifications of a camera are somehow now this bigger thing than they were, and there have always been things that some cameras do better than the other, but at the end of the day, like, if you lose yourself in the technology, then you're just going to make really good looking crap that nobody is going to care about. And if you go through Instagram, you can see a lot of accounts where people make stuff that looks really pretty, and I'm not judging individuals here. I'm talking about like specifically accounts that like poach a lot of stuff and that use really like just really questionable, fluffy content that is oftentimes not their own, and they put that out there. It's soulless content that nobody cares about, even though it looks really, really, really beautiful. But there's so much more to it than that, and the hardest part is really letting the camera look the other way and say, yeah, this is who I am, this is what I have to say, this is why I think that my perspective on the world is worth seeing, and it's important for other people to, and maybe it's not even for other people like the world at large, maybe it's just for your family or your friends or for yourself down the road. I mean, I know that the greatest joy that I get out of any of the films that I make and the photos that I take, it's all comes back to, when I'm in the closet and I'm not out there having fun doing amazing adventures and stuff, and I'm a little bit bummed out because, I had to rewrite my resume 4 times for 4 different jobs and nobody called me back. Like, I can look at some of the things that I've made and relive those experiences and have those and be like, yeah, that's not forget about, the good stuff. So I think that, I'm definitely curious to hear from you guys, like where you guys got your start in digital storytelling, and kind of what your perspectives are on that stuff. It's interesting to me how many different ways there are to find yourself, whether it's just, from an amateur standpoint or a commercial standpoint, or some combination of those two things that bring one into the position where they're really interested in, developing what they do, developing that craft more. So I think that another thing too that's worth mentioning is that there's really a lot of value in, not necessarily to say that there's anything like a downside specifically, or that there's anything wrong with doing commercial work, or just trying to create work that is going to get you paid, because certainly that's something that I have been trying to do over the last week, and I've actually started to make some inroads in that field, and it's looking like I'm getting closer to having a really serious, like a full-time client where I would be making lots of content for them, and both video and stills. And again, being able to sell both as one package has been really helpful for me, and I owe a lot of that to not having the option to do one or the other, but having, to do both when I started, and now I have that versatility. I'm really, really excited about that. But I think that being able to have had so many years of completely serious but non-commercial digital storytelling has really given me the privilege and the opportunity, because I say privilege because I had an audience that is still with me after my first project, and that is something I firmly believe is a huge privilege, because nobody deserves an audience, and that can be seen very clearly. I mean, how many people make great content and are struggling on YouTube because, you know, there's not everybody has that kind of an audience. And you know, I make the mistake of comparing myself to other YouTubers sometimes, and I'm just like, man, I shoot the stuff that's as good as theirs. Like, and it's really easy to lose track of the fact that it's a huge privilege to have even 100 people that care what you think and care what your videos are like and what photographs you're taking. And you know, when you kind of start getting momentum, it's easy to kind of get hung up on the, yeah, well, I'm interested in the next 500 or 1,000 mark or whatever, but you stop appreciating the people that are there with you and that have been with you from the beginning. And so having that privilege is something I'm very grateful for, and also, frankly, having you know, the opportunity and the time to be able to do this with, which is, I think, one of the hardest things. Is time is money, and you know, being able to spend 5 years seriously pursuing photography with a very limited amount of commercial, you know, kind of sustainability to that, where I haven't really been able to bring in a sustainable paycheck, and haven't kind of gotten over that hump, has been something that's been really challenging, and I certainly wouldn't have been able to do that without the support of my wife and family, you know. Steve M says, that's what I do. Started 30 years ago, way before HD was even here. Shot with the Sony and Ikegami beta cams. Then Sony came out with PD 150 DV cam, and I never packed a beta camera again. And I don't even know what any of those cameras are. So those are before my time and outside my realm of expertise. And it's interesting to see, because I haven't seen that much in the way of transitions, you know, like I kind of have had 5 very condensed years without having to spread it out as much. And of course, I kick myself now for not starting earlier, and I didn't start earlier because I was afraid. You know, I thought, like, you know, you have to be somebody to be a photographer. It never occurred to me that, no, you just have to be interested and be curious. And I think that curiosity is something that is, you know, that I encourage, and I try to adapt my style of creation, whether it is stills or video. I try to adapt everything to satisfy my curiosity. Like, if I am shooting something in such a way that it's going to give like some perfection in the image, but that is going to limit me in terms of my ability to explore and be creative and investigate something and experience something, then honestly, I want no part of it. And it's a luxury to be able to look at the creative process from that standpoint. That's a little bit of a spoiled brat way to look at things, and I accept ownership of that. And it's largely because I've had, you know, the last 6 years or so with my wife being very patient and going through a lot of, you know, stuff with me financially to make this happen, and to understand that this is the investment of time that it takes to kind of develop yourself, you know. Steve M says, it's funny when I hear internet wars over who has the most dynamic range and sharpness, and back 25 years ago, the image quality didn't even come close to today's iPhone. That's a really great point. And, you know, 25 years ago, there were still really great photographs being made. People were still doing some really impressive stuff. And I guess back then, right, there was still the debate between 35 millimeter versus medium format versus large format. And it always kind of makes me cringe a little bit when I hear or read people just going off the rails and getting wrapped around the axle, to use a favorite expression of my brother. You know, based on the things that are just completely hardware related, because that stuff is always going to change, and that stuff is never going to be, in my mind, more important than, you know, your belief in and commitment to the story that you're telling. And you know, good work is always going to be there, whether it's in standard definition or on film or HD or 4K or 8K or whatever. It's like, good work and interesting work is always going to be, you know. And even now, like, if you look at a lot of the shows like that are on Netflix, and you know, a lot of the things that are very interesting, it's like there's always a certain element of retro and throwback to what is being done, or at least in many shows. Not saying that everything is about, you know, commercial television opportunities or filmmaking or what have you, but there's always a market for good content in whatever form it comes along, and content is never going to be any better than, I guess that's kind of my takeaway, and you guys may agree or disagree, but content, you know, content is king. I agree with that. However, content is never going to be any better and any stronger than the belief that the creator of that content has. Like, you know, the two are inextricably linked, I think, in a lot of ways. Queen of San Joaquin says, as far as my channel goes, I had wanted to have a channel for a long time, but I kept getting caught up in the technical aspect of it all. All I had was my phone. So one day I decided to just do it. I've learned so much about myself. Sometimes I look at my old videos and I feel like I'm giving myself advice. That is excellent advice, Queen of San Joaquin. I absolutely love that, and I think that that approach is something that, if there's one thing I could communicate to people, and I hope that I do, in between all my, you know, ranting and pixel peeping and, you know, trying to, you know, getting bogged down in my own self-loathing and creative malaise, is that this is a way to just work. This is scratch pad. YouTube is a scratch pad. This isn't, and I don't think any creative endeavor is about the finished product. It's about the process that goes into it and what you're learning and how important it is to be able to understand and say, yeah, this is something that might not work, and that's totally fine. And that, to a certain extent, like, there have been videos that I've worked on where it's like, I know that it has this, for example, the scenic route, the little short that I did or that I finally uploaded last week about my climbing trip, that kind of went a little bit sideways when I was in Canada, British Columbia, last summer. There were gaps there in the story. There were things that I just did not shoot that I should have shot that would have made it so much better. And I just did not have them, and there was no way around that fact. And part of the reason why I put off the editing process for so long is, like, in my mind, and I know this is going to sound stupid, but, like, we tell ourselves, we have these, like, play these little games with ourselves. And I was like, you know, maybe if I just wait longer, it's going to magically appear. Like, there's going to be better stuff. The stuff that I shot is going to somehow ferment, and it's going to, like, become better. And the reality is, it's like, nope, I went back there and it just was not there. And so I had to kind of fall on that sword, jump on the grenade, whatever violent analogy you want to use for it, and just say, yeah, this isn't going to be the apex of my work. It's not going to be the best thing ever, but that's okay. There's still a story here that I can tell that matters, that's better than not doing anything. And the funny thing is, it came out so much better than I was anticipating, because the story and the care and the love and the concern and the personal nature of it, I think, came through, despite the fact that the technical stuff was, yeah, it was, you know, it was pretty homespun. But that's okay. That's still a lot of people. That's one of my very few videos that does not have any thumbs down at this point here on YouTube. It's gotten a lot of, yeah, it's got 38 thumbs up, 0 thumbs down, you know. So Steve M says, I'll tell you a show to watch on TV. There's an absolute lesson on storytelling, both on how it's shot and how it's edited. River Monster with Jeremy Wade on the Animal Planet channel. Very interesting. I have not heard anybody mention that show in that context, but I have gotten a lot of, and again, sort of a similar type of channel, History Channel, you know, watching things like Curse of Oak Island and looking at the way that they edit that. And I think that a lot of, like, History, Nat Geo, Animal Planet, and Discovery seems to put a little, at least with Discovery Channel, I think they're the ones that do Planet Earth. But I could be wrong about that. I know, I actually was climbing with a guy when I was over in Oman, who shot for that production, and of course he was very much like, you know, patting me on the head, and he was a little bit condescending about my little Fuji camera that I was carrying around at the time, and I was like, well, whatever, dude, you're getting paid however much to shoot on a multi-million-dollar production, so we're very different, and that's totally cool. But definitely, I think the point that you made, Steve, like the way that they tell the story and the different techniques, the more you start doing that, one of the things that I did is kind of started looking at things that I liked and just said, I like this, I want to do this one thing. And for me, the very first thing that I saw, ironically, where I started, was nighttime time lapses, like star lapses of the Milky Way. And I saw that on a video. There was this video, I'll post the link in the show notes below. I'm assuming it's still online. It was very cutting edge at the time. It was by Uncage the Soul Productions from Oregon. And it was for Department of Tourism for the state of Oregon. And it was all time lapses, and tons of it was astro time lapses with the Milky Way, like wheeling it through the sky, and they had some After Effects stuff in there that made the star trails, and I was just like, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, the Milky Way and the open sky is the one thing that typifies the just wonder of being out west and nature, and what attracted me to climbing. Like, I grew up on the East Coast where you couldn't really see much of the stars, being all the light pollution, and then the first time I went out west, it was just like, holy hell, this is unbelievable. Hyperlapses, that's another interesting technique that Steve M mentions. I do like hyperlapses. I just started getting into the hyperlapses, but like with the astrolapse, I said, I'm going to just start doing this thing, and I just kind of worked on doing more and more of that until either, what usually happens with those techniques is you get good enough at it to where you can easily incorporate it, or you kind of are just like, it's okay. And that's kind of what happened to me with the Milky Way shots. If you look at some of the videos that I have here and my playlists, I have a couple of time-lapse reels, if you visit my channel page, and I kind of got to the point where it was like, okay, it's fun, like it's beautiful, but in terms of storytelling, does that really make or break anything? And most of it that makes a good story or makes a story not good is just meat and potato stuff. It's not fancy camera tricks. Like, you can still make a good story without that. In terms of hyperlapses, this last trip to the Middle East, I shot some hyperlapses, and hopefully in about a week or so I'm going to be able to release my at least one of my, I'm going to have a couple of videos that are going to come out of that. I shot just tons of stuff over like 12 days, and it was all kind of shooting from the hip. So some of it was in Oman, some of it Dubai, some of it by the ocean, some of it by the mountains, some of it in the cities, and like some of it with family, some of it climbing like with my friend, and like out and kind of in the indigenous Omani culture there. So, but you'll get to see my first attempts at hyperlapses, which you'll probably be able to tell that it's my first attempt at the hyperlapses, because they're a little bit rough, but I think they can be fun. You can do some cool stuff with that. Queen of San Joaquin says, in fact, my highest viewed video was actually something I made spur of the moment from a comment. Some videos I put a lot of work into have only a few views. So it's a big learning experience trying to make videos you think people will like. You just never know. I think it's better to make videos you like, and if people watch, it's just a bonus. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, the hardest thing to do is to not become self-aware or self-conscious, because when you start to do that, it makes it a lot harder. But when you're truly excited about something that you're making, something that you're creating, like, other people are going to see that. And one of the things that I found too is, a lot of times people look at things as just like having a huge volume on your channel, but if you have a handful of people that are watching, and that are consistently engaged, like that's so awesome. Like, in some ways, not saying that I don't want my channel to get bigger, not saying that by any stretch of the imagination, but I like being able to wake up every day and be excited to be like, ooh, who can I talk to? Who's leaving comments on my videos? Like, who do I meet today? Whose problem can I help solve? And I think that where I've seen the most growth in my channel has to do with problems that I can potentially solve. And some channels, do more like entertainment type of content. And I'm not a fun or funny person. I'm pretty serious. Like I like thinking about things. I was a philosophy major. I'm gonna do a video in the next week or two talking about philosophy and filmmaking, because I think that so much of how we do things, whether it's the type of camera that we shoot with, where we shoot with that camera, what our finished product looks like, how we present ourselves and everything else to the world, it has a lot to do with our values and principles as people. And that's not like Casey. I mean, Casey Neistat has some serious conversations like that, and there are some people that are just very gifted or better or work harder, and like I feel like one of the reasons, well, Steve S says, speaking of Casey, the guy that everybody raves about, okay, I watched a video of his and I just don't get it. Maybe it was my age, but that just wasn't interesting. There are some of Casey Neistat's videos where I'm just like, eh. But one of the things that I like about a lot of his videos that I'm always impressed by is the amount of diversity and volume of different things that he can blend into a fairly coherent storyline with very little, or what appears to be very little, pre-production and or planning. And he oftentimes like weaves a thread that has some philosophical impact, talking about things like how growing up and having a kid and being a single dad when he was like 18 or 16 or whenever it was, dropping out of high school, how those things impacted his life and changed like his work ethic and his views. And like, I think I really appreciate that stuff, even though there's a limited amount of Casey Neistat's videos that I can watch at one given point. There are things that there are elements of his philosophy as a person and his values that show through in the way he makes videos. Yes, so there's definitely a lot of people copy that, and it's always kind of awkward, when you see other people trying really, really hard to copy other vloggers, and they're making it harder on themselves than they need it to be, and it's a little bit sad. Or at least I always feel a little embarrassed for them. Aaron J asked me a non-camera related question. Wow, this is awesome. I get to talk a little bit about my my diabetes and my injections. Aaron asks, is there a reason I prefer injections over pump, like in the Bugaboo video? Yes, I actually have always been on injections for these 20 years. It's very simple, very easy, very portable. I carry it with me anywhere I go. I don't have to worry about running out of, having to change pumps. Like, pumps require, and Aaron, I don't know if you have type 1 yourself or if you are, just tangentially interested in it, but pumps definitely have a lot more maintenance that goes into keeping them. So while they are very technical or technological, and that can be very beneficial from some standpoints, it's also a risk factor when you have to manage carrying a bunch of extra stuff. And ironically, it's the same reason why I make films the way that I do, is like, I feel compelled to do everything in such a way that, if everything goes sideways wherever I am, I want to be able to, put everything in my bag and go down the road and have the simplest possible method. To me, always seems like the best one 9 times out of 10. And so injections are just a lot simpler for me than a pump. And a lot of the reason that that's the case is because of my diet. I eat a high-fat, low-carb diet, and because I eat that way, it drastically reduces the amount of micromanagement throughout the day that I need to do. which is also part of the reason that 36 hours on the go was not a problem for me. And my partner Martin, he also has type 1, and he doesn't eat the way I do at all. He eats his own way. But for me personally, I can say that, being able to be in an extended situation like that, 36 hours, climbing straight without sleep, and, in sort of a critical situation with the weather on top of the mountain, etc., not having to screw around with managing my blood sugar is a huge, huge benefit of the diet. And that's part of the reason why I eat the way that I do. Even though it seems a little bit extreme to some people, eating 75% of my calories as fat. I eat like a stick of butter probably every week, maybe every 5 days or so, although I do eat grass-fed butter predominantly because it's, got more vitamins and nutrients in it. But yeah. The low in the film... Steve M, yes, the video that I'm talking about, it is posted. It's called The Scenic Route. That was 3 videos ago, about a week ago or so. It's called The Scenic Route. Aaron, yes, you've broken several pumps in the backcountry before. And to be fair, Aaron, I do know a handful of other climbers that have type 1 that climb very hard, that do very remote expedition, big wall climbing, that wear insulin pumps and do really, really well with that. So I think a lot of it comes down to what your comfort level is. And for me, when I'm climbing, I just hate to have stuff attached to my body. Just having the CGM attached to me is, that's a trade-off I'm willing to make, but I don't like it. I like what it allows me to do. But yeah, it's always a concern, like when you're climbing and got to be wriggling through, through chimneys and cracks and scraping up against stuff. You don't want to have in the back of your mind, I'm going to, rip off my pump site or my CGM or whatever. Yeah, no worries, Aaron. Happy to answer questions. The low in the film, I would say that what happened there is I probably should have eaten a little, because the approach up to where we started climbing, so the film starts where we're in a tent waking up and climbing. The day before was a 5-hour hike that is like this, and with huge packs on, because I had, we got all of our climbing gear, but then we also have camera gear, plus we have all the food and stuff like that. Steve M, did I shoot that on the GH5 or the Fuji? Funny story, I shot that actually on the Sony RX100 Mark II. In Sony years, it's like a million years old because they release a new camera like every 6 months. But yeah, Sony RX100 Mark II, and the talking head interview footage I shot on the G7 by Panasonic. But yeah, the low that I had, I think that it was because the hike the last night, and when I woke up, my blood sugar was good, and it was just kind of like that second day of sustained effort. It made me a little bit more insulin sensitive, and I should have had a little bit more carbs when I started, and I was a little bit light because I didn't want my sugar to go high, so I was trying to, and lows still do happen, even with the keto diet. The one thing I can say is that having a low where it's like, it's a slow low, where it's not like, oh, there goes my blood sugar, it's crashing, I gotta stop and chow down candy bars. One of the reasons why it took so long to treat is because you're eating, and you're eating stuff that doesn't have, you're not eating, or at least I'm not eating simple sugars, so I'm eating like chocolate and things with a little bit of fat or whatever. And so that takes a longer time for it to come back up. So it's slower going down, slower coming back up, and then, it kind of moves ahead from there. So ultimately, that's what I attribute the low to, is just probably should have had, a little bit more carbs for breakfast, since I had been, done a really, really stout, sustained hike the night before just to get up there. And I, took that a little bit lightly, and it's hard to tell. You don't always know how your body's going to react. So that's always, I feel like I have very, very good control of my blood sugar, and even with that, it's like there's still sometimes when your body's just like, oh, you think you're gonna go climbing this morning? Let's let's circle back on that. We might have to stop for an hour and a half while you wait for your blood sugar to come up. It still happens, you know. Queen of San Joaquin says, another off-topic question. Awesome, keep them coming. I love off-topic questions. Yosemite climb. I have not said anything about it on here. I actually had to, and I had everything lined up. I was going to climb with another partner who also had type 1. Basically what happened, and I didn't want to make a big deal about it, and it was kind of hard, and I know it shouldn't be hard to say, but like, I just didn't have the money. And it just felt irresponsible to go out to Yosemite and to try to climb something where there was really no financial incentive or, you know, way that I could support my family and kind of leave my wife and daughter here, kind of leave them holding the bag while I go off for 2 weeks to do something is potentially risky and not financially viable. So I went down to Virginia during, well, actually, now was the time that I was going to be going down there, but so I went down to Virginia anyways and did some work, and I'll probably go back down to Virginia and do some logging with my brother, and probably as risky or more risky, I guess, in a lot of ways, because trees are incredibly dangerous, you know. Bob Ross and all of his, you know, painting happy trees, well, yeah, those trees have a lot of potential energy, and they're waiting to maim you in many different ways. But you know, that's kind of the way that I worked it out, and I absolutely still intend to go to Yosemite. But right now, what I'm trying to do right now is really get work, and you know, putting my portfolio out there. I just redid my photography portfolio, added some new things to my video stuff, and I'm out there, like, you know, applying to jobs, trying to get work, because ultimately what I want to do is try to find some company that I can work with, as you know, to tell their story. Because one of the things that I've recognized through what I've learned on YouTube and social media and everything with storytelling is that companies really suck at telling their stories, because it's creativity by committees. And so I've started to realize that there's a huge amount of opportunity for individuals, for creators like us, to go and really help put a more personal face on, you know, a story that a brand is trying to tell, because PR companies honestly are not good at that either. You know, they do stuff that they can make stuff that looks really good and looks really professional, but the problem is we've all got used to seeing things that look professional, and we tune out when we see something that looks professional. We want to see stuff, you know, we're here on YouTube because we appreciate stuff that is personal and that it has a little bit more homespun element to it. And so what I'm working on right now actually is working with a couple of companies trying to get something where I would be a full-time vlogger slash documentarian that is kind of telling their story or sharing stories from people in their community as it relates to my travels and my adventure. So you know, right now this is just a flash in the pan, and I'm trying not to get too giddy and with excitement over it, but if that were to happen, then, you know, I would have funding to be able to go out, tell the stories, and live, you know, the things that I'm doing, like climbing in Yosemite, but along the way tell their story and people from their community, and also, you know, share my story as part of this company's community, which obviously don't want to talk too much about who it is or anything like that, but right now, because it's still early days. But one way or the other, I'm going to be less broke at some point, Lord willing, whether that's through cutting down a bunch of trees, or, you know, I applied today, as every day I apply for a couple of jobs, you know, photography jobs. Like I applied for newborn photographer, which I take a lot of pictures of my daughter, and I really like, I don't know, I don't love other people's kids, but like I'm pretty good with kids. Like I was a camp counselor for a long time. I even ran my own camp, and well, Queen of San Joaquin, I appreciate that. I say, don't feel bad, happens to us all. I believe you that you're broke as hell, and we're all kind of, and having cameras, like cameras are this like curse because they have this, they whisper to you that, hey, I'm going to earn you lots of money, and if you just buy me, it's going to help you get this job, and somebody's, you know, you're going to be a professional, and it's going to be okay that you spent $2,000 on a new camera because I'm going to earn you that money back, and it's all going to be okay. And then you realize that at the end of the day, you still have to spend a huge amount of time like putting in work and going to companies and showing them that your camera is worth anything in your hands, because that's ultimately what everything comes down to, right? But yeah, so every day I'm applying for jobs in one way or the other, whether it's newborn photography. There's one that I applied to here in Boston is like antique photography, and I was like, sweet, I'd be able to use all my Visco filters, you know, to get that vintage film look with the Fuji camera. Like, I would be a shoo-in for this job. Like, I would love doing that, you know. So we're gonna keep doing that until we get enough to make it, you know, get out to Yosemite and climb something. That's the goal, because climbing is still really an important part of my life. Steve M says, I did a show back in the day called California Captured. We did 2 episodes, and that was it. The idea behind the show is to bring interesting places to those less fortunate that can't possibly ... I'm guessing get out and experience the world. That's awesome. You know, I think that has, Steve, that has been a lot of my motivation. That has been to just, you know, a lot of people living with chronic illness, whether it's type 1 diabetes, type 2, or like a variety of other things. There are a lot of people that still feel connected to the natural world and want to get out and experience that stuff. And I've never really branded it that way or like expressed it that way, although I like the way you say that. But I've had a lot of people at various points express the, you know, that's something that they take out of my work, which always makes me really happy, because when I started living vertical, my kind of mindset was, you know, because I was coming from a position of being a guide. I was a rock climbing and canyoneering guide, so I literally would take people who had never been out there and didn't think it was possible for them to climb a rock or, you know, descend a slot canyon, what have you. I would take them out, teach them the skills, and supervise them so that they could get through that safely. And my goal was like to encourage everybody to go out and just try this stuff at least once, because even if you hate it and you get scared to death, like, you learn something about yourself. You have to confront a certain part of yourself. Same thing with photography and video making, of course. But I think that, well, I kind of lost my train of comment because I saw your comments, and I lost my train of thought because I saw your comments, and I was like, your comments are more interesting than my train of thought. So Queen of San Joaquin says, I can't get a job because I'm a certified mechanic, and I'm a chick, and they can't get a job because I'm a chick because people think I can't handle being a mechanic as a chick. And Steve M says he kind of is disagreeing with that here in the comments. And so, Queen, I think what you're saying is, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that you can't get a job as a mechanic. Is that correct? Like, because it's typically seen as being like a mostly male profession. Is that what you're talking? Okay, dude, I think that is like a super interesting angle. Like, that right there is okay. So I have a friend who's very much he was in the last video. I showed a picture of him, my friend Andrew. My best friend since I was 8 years old. We were 2 misfits that found each other and just like hung out. We did ham radio stuff together, and like we were 2 little weirdos at, like, you know, 11 years old. We were learning Morse code so we could get a ham radio license and stuff like that. And so he watches a bunch of channels on YouTube that are just like mechanic channels, because he does a lot with oh, you're in Bishop, Aaron? Like Bishop, California? If so, I'm gonna have to come and see you at some point, because Bishop is amazing. I love Bishop. It's like, literally, if I could live anywhere, I think Bishop is, again, assuming that you mean Bishop, California. I love Bishop. But Queen, you're as a female mechanic, like, that is incredibly interesting. And to me, I think that's the biggest thing is like when you make a channel, the more you make it about the stuff that makes the things that are your areas that are vulnerable, or the things that you're struggling with on some level. You know, oh man, yeah, Mount Whitney right over my other shoulder. Yeah. Yep. Got that for I think it was for Christmas last year. My wife got me those. Yeah. Oh man, that's awesome. I'm glad I know somebody in Bishop now. Yeah, Bishop is just like, I haven't been there for a few years, but it's such an amazing place. But I'm sorry, I got lost, sidetracked ranting about how much I love Bishop, California. But Queen, honestly, like, I think that would be like, what an outstanding way to brand your channel, as like female mechanics. Like, how many other women do you think there are who either know stuff about mechanics but feel marginalized like you do? Or how many women would like to learn about mechanics and are just like, hey, you know, I can turn a wrench just as well as any guy can, and who would love to have you as a role model where you're just like, look, I'm a chick, I'm a mechanic, and here's what we're going to do. I'm rebuilding this car, and I can. Dude, like, I'm trying not to get all like giddy, and you don't, I'm not going to ask you for for any ideation or anything, but you know, I'm not going to ask you for royalties down the road, but please do that. Like, that just sounds like, to me, that's an awesome idea for a channel. Like, you could crush that. You could crush that, especially with everything right now that's going on with like trying to, you know, level the playing field and gender stuff. And, you know, everybody has different opinions about that stuff. There's some people that aren't into it, and some people that are like, oh, I don't want a chick working on my car. And there are some people that would go out of their way and pay way more to have a female working on their car. And like, my daughter's 3 years old. Every time I have the opportunity to hang something up with her, I'm like, this is a Phillips head screwdriver. This is the way it works, because I love my daughter and I want her to be, you know, I want her to be self-sufficient. I want her to be strong. I want her to be capable. And like, it's important for girls to have those kind of role models. And like, I don't know a single female auto mechanic. You are the first person in my life that I have ever heard of. And granted, I haven't been out there looking, but like, I mean, I know about a lot of other different YouTube channels. Like, I know a farmer who cuts hay in New Jersey that my friend watches. Like, I don't know anything about hay, but like your experience, it's like, that's the thing. It's like, you look for the thing that makes you unique and your experience unique. And for me, you know, my diabetes is something that has made my experience unique. Maybe not like that everybody wants to be involved with diabetes stuff, but like, having that struggle, that burden, that's given me a different perspective on life. That's what pushed me out the door and caused me to take an interest in the world around me and see it the way that I do. And then that is ultimately what people gravitate towards. But it comes from saying, what's that? It's almost like the way that oysters make pearls. It's a grain of sand that gets stuck in their somewhere in their digestive system and actually creates like an ulcer and an irritation. And that irritation, it becomes callous and it builds up and turns into a pearl. It's overlaid with a biological product or compound, I don't know, enzyme perhaps, that hardens into, you know, mother of pearl. And that's where pearls come from. They start off as just something that gets stuck in the oyster's craw and that they can't cough up and get rid of. And I think there's a certain extent to which, you know, look at Casey Neistat being a single dad. That was that stumbling block that he took and said, I'm going to make something out of this. You know, as a female auto mechanic, that's rad. Like, there's, I mean, hell, a year from now, you could have all kinds of sponsorships. And I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, it's an easy, straight up thing, you know, to go from A to B, but if you put in the work on doing this, I guarantee you there is a market for this. And I'm like, so I'm half excited for you and half jealous that I don't have a hook that's that good for my YouTube channel. But honestly, like in the outdoor stuff, the outdoor space, like REI, look at REI on Twitter, and the Outdoor Women's Alliance, also on Twitter or on Instagram, or I'm sure you could look on their websites too. They're all like pushing a huge amount of stuff in terms of like female empowerment in the outdoors, and there is absolutely a market for that. Like there has never been, literally never been in history. And you know, what better time and way to just put yourself out there and be like, yeah, girls can fix cars. We're going to rebuild this engine. Because, you know, and obviously if you can get that formula and dial it in to where, you know, experiment with it, play with it a little bit. I mean, you know, don't be afraid to really think about, and I would highly, and we met on the video creators live chat, Queen, if I'm not mistaken, and that channel has been really, really, really helpful for me in terms of learning about YouTube. But you know, don't be afraid of, you know, being really niche, because it feels kind of niche. But I can tell you, as somebody who is not female, who's not a mechanic, who really doesn't care about learning about auto mechanics, when I hear that, I'm like, dude, that sounds really interesting. Like that's the kind of thing that, I mean, the History Channel has how many shows, or is it Entertainment E? I don't know what channel it has, like the tattoo shops. Like, who gives a shit about tattoos? You know, it's like, yeah, okay, maybe I get a tattoo once in my life, but I don't, you know, I've never gone looking and said, oh man, I want to hang out with somebody that's a tattoo artist. But how many millions of people tune in to watch those shows about, you know, what happens at a tattoo shop? You know, you've got something there. Definitely, definitely, definitely. Like you've got something. It's just now the next thing is like taking it from, you know, taking it to the next level. And what I would suggest is, you know, in terms of getting like the technical chops up to speed, learn about B-roll, shooting B-roll, and start daily vlogging, because daily vlogging is a really good way to build your channel. Plus, daily vlogging is a really good way to get a lot faster at editing and to give yourself the slack to be able to say, you know what, I'm just going to say what's the best product I can make in this 12-hour period of my day. What's the best I can do? And then as you get faster and faster, it's like you start to get better and better, and things that would have taken you like forever to do. Like my very first documentary, it was 50 minutes long, 50, and it took me a year to edit that. And I've done things that are better in quality, much more better shot, like all this stuff. And yeah, Steve M says brakes need being replaced, rotors and pads, and as a guy I should know how to do that, and I don't have a clue. Right there with you, Steve M. I am not mechanically savvy, and frankly, even just YouTube aside, a good mechanic who is trustworthy and honest and like knows their onions and isn't trying to like scam you, dude, you're worth your weight in gold. Like seriously, like that's such an amazing talent and a skill to have. Yeah, totally do that. And thank you, Queen, for the love on the camera stuff. And I hope that I can start to actually be helpful in terms of like now the chops, for, you know, getting the storytelling chops up to speed. Well, then let's see about how we can. Queen says editing has really been hard for me. I did daily videos and never edited. It's my weakness. You know, let's see if maybe you can drop me some questions about like the specific things that you want to know about editing, and that'll give me a good point to start, because I want to start talking about editing as part of storytelling. And kind of knowing where it is that you're starting off, that would help me kind of direct my content a little bit. You know, that would be really useful, because I would love to do that. And if you need a camera to borrow, like if you only, do you have a camera, or are you just shooting on your iPhone? Because if you need a camera to borrow, I do have a Panasonic G7 that I would be willing to loan you indefinitely, if you need that. And can't spare any lenses because I only have the couple lenses. But Micro Four Thirds lenses are pretty cheap, and maybe you could grab a lens, and then with the camera and the batteries, then you'd have theoretically enough to have at least shoot in 4K and have a little bit of kind of get up to speed. Okay, so you have a Sony Handycam. Okay, great, excellent. That will do. What do you use for a computer? Do you have any sort of editing program that you use? Do you have an Apple computer of any sort? Because I would highly recommend, and again, this is my personal bias, and personal bias is always a part of storytelling, because storytelling is always personal. But I'm a big fan of the MacBook computers, even the little laptops, and if you're just shooting Sony Handycam, like HD, SD type stuff, like not shooting big 4K, you can buy a refurbished MacBook Pro, like a little 13-inch refurbished, like from, so an old Apple with Pro Tools, like if, and again, this is big if, right? I don't know much about Pro Tools, but I think that the general things that you need to be able to start editing are going to be just really just cutting. Just cutting and adjusting the pictures and the audio and layering some of those things. Those are the basic things that you need. The PC just has a stock editing program. So I have done some editing with Windows Media Editor, I think it's called, back in the day. Pro Tools, I don't know anything about Pro Tools. I know Logic Pro is what I use for editing audio. What I would highly recommend, if not immediately, and I'm not saying that this would be a bar or barrier to entry, Queen, but I would say if you have some money to spend at some point as an investment, I think it would be worth it for you to get, so Queen, did you mean iMovie? Is iMovie what you have? DaVinci Resolve. Okay, so what year is your Queen? What year is your computer? Because it should have, if it's like a Mac OS system, it should have iMovie in there. And if you have iMovie, then iMovie is actually a really, really great program to edit on. Very user friendly and easy to learn. And I have iMovie, I think, on here somewhere. I might have deleted it just because I don't use it, because I use Final Cut Pro X, which is kind of like iMovie Plus. Like it's, I use Final Cut Pro. Yeah, Final Cut Pro X, which is very, very user friendly as well, and is great because it can do most of the things that can be done with like the bigger, fancier programs. The one weakness that I know of specifically with Final Cut Pro, oh, you have Final Cut Pro. Okay, is it Final Cut Pro 10 or Final Cut Pro X that you have? Because if you have that, then you're in business. Or, I mean, at least then I would be in a good position to be able to help you very straight across, because that's what I use, and so I can tell you how to do things exactly as I do them. Awesome. Okay, so you have Final Cut Pro X. Great, great, great. Okay, so you're off. You don't even need to get a new computer. Yeah, very cool. So yeah, with Final Cut Pro X, you can do just about everything that you need to. But like if you start small and keep it simple, and just learn from there, that would be my recommendation. And again, like if there are specific questions, and what I would say is like, just try making a couple of videos just to practice editing, like, and what I would say is, do something where you're talking, even if it's something really simple, like where you're talking about the process of making a cup of coffee, or what making coffee means to you. And so you do a shot like this where you're talking head, sitting in front of the camera, and you're just sitting there at a table, just talking to the camera and saying, okay, the first time I had coffee, it was this, this, and this, the other thing. And then like, if you can get somebody to make coffee, or you can even set up shots after you do that little talking head bit. You tell that story, the narration, the interview portion, or what have you, and then you shoot clips from different angles, some close up, some, you know, wider shot of you actually making the coffee, right? Or if you can get better yet, if you have somebody else who's making coffee and you're the one holding the camera, and then that way, you know, because trying to be in the shot and also setting up the shot is kind of a pain in the butt. I mean, you can do it, and it's part of vlogging, but, you know, and then what you do is you bring all of those things into Final Cut, and then you put, you know, kind of layer some of those, the shots of you making coffee, you layer that visual over the talking head part so that we're hearing the talking head audio where you're saying, this is the first time I had coffee and I remember what it was like and this is where I was and this is whatever the story is that you're telling in that narration, but we're seeing the clips of, you know, different angles and scenes and, you know, creative looks at the physical process of making coffee rather than just seeing you staring at the camera the whole time. We're hearing one thing and we're seeing those different little visual clips. That's called B-roll, and B-roll is hugely important. Your problem is navigating the editing program itself. Okay, that's something we will have to dig into in the future a little bit. It can be a little bit challenging to give that. I mean, I'm not the best guy to do tutorials, frankly, on editing in terms of the nuts and bolts of how to edit. There are some really good tutorials out there. And one of the things I would say, just very generally speaking, watch a few videos on YouTube. Probably not my videos because, like I said, I haven't done a lot of tutorials, and I don't feel like I'm very good at tutorials because I'm probably a little bit more verbose, and I haven't taught enough people how to use Final Cut Pro to the point where I know the progression. Like, okay, these are the first 3 things you need to master, and then the 4th, 5th, and 6th, so like this, and then you kind of build on that. I'm not at that point in terms of instructional stuff with video editing, but if you watch a couple of videos just to learn the basics and practice doing a couple of things so that you understand, like, I guess the foundational stuff would be learn how to import footage and learn how to create new projects and drag stuff from your library down onto the project timeline. And then once you have that, pretty much, you know, you got your footage on, you know, a project made and you have footage on the timeline, pretty much any of the questions that you need to know about, like, how do I cut it, or how do I fade the audio, or how do I, you know, increase the volume, or how do I make it brighter or darker, how do I, you know, make it slow motion or speed it up. Like, you can, any question that you have, well, you go to YouTube and you put it in and you get the answer. But I would suggest just making the worst possible, most awful movies that you can, just to get better at it, just to learn the basic skills. So take whatever you know, take whatever you know and build on that by, you know, getting a little outside of your comfort zone and then Googling to find out questions to solve that problem. And then once you have that problem solved, then say, okay, then go to the next thing. And that's really what it comes down to, is just taking it incrementally and problem solving as it goes. Steve M says, I've taught many. It's not a huge learning curve, 1 day's worth, and you're on your way. And that sounds about what I would think. Like, if you have somebody, ideally even that, you know, local, that you could meet up with and just ask that, because that's the thing. Like, if I could spend a day and just like come over and visit and be like, hey, okay, here's how you do everything, and then I could show you all the things you need to know. You ask questions there in real time and like, done deal. It's a little bit more clunky having to go back and forth and, you know, search stuff out on YouTube. But I promise you that if you find a good channel, and I don't know any right off the top of my head to recommend, but there are channels that just do Final Cut Pro X tutorials, and they will just go through all the different things that you could want to know. You know, spend a little time, take some notes maybe, and then once you feel like you understand the basics, go out there and bump into some walls, you know. And Steve says, if it were me and I was just learning, I would probably lean towards a trackless timeline, which is Final Cut Pro X. I've only used Final Cut Pro X, so I don't know the difference between a track and a trackless timeline. Again, maybe that's revealing how green I am, but I started off using iMovie, and then I tried I tried using Final Cut Pro X, and then I just fell in love with it. And the one guy, my mentor actually, who has been doing, he's an audio producer, audio post, and he does like audio production out the wazoo. I mean, he's worked with like Busta Rhymes and the Beatles and stuff like that. Track-based means you have to target the video separately from the audio. I got you now. No, I've never used anything track-based then. You know, he gave me all kinds of hell because he did the audio post-production on my documentary, which, you know, helped me out tremendously, and I'm so thankful that he did that, and, you know, kind of became my mentor. And he would always like complain about like, oh, Final Cut Pro sucks. I can't believe you use that. It's the worst thing. It's so amateurish, blah, blah, blah. You really need to get up to speed. Like, you know, you need to learn how to use Premiere because Final Cut Pro sucks. And I was like, okay, fine. And I just didn't listen to him because I was like, Final Cut Pro X is so much easier to use than Premiere. I just don't care. I'm going to keep using what makes sense for me and what's easy. And the big downside with Premiere is like when you're working as a group and like exporting projects in a way that you're going to hand it off to somebody else and that they're going to need to like pick up the same video project and then start in on it. My understanding is that Adobe Premiere is really easy to streamline it from one person to the next and kind of share things, share projects amongst a large group. So it's ideal for larger groups. But for individual stuff, you know, when I heard, well, the funny thing is, like, after a couple of years, you know, my mentor, who was always complaining about how much he hated working with Final Cut Pro X, he started, like, emailing me and being like, dude, I saw your last movie that you put out. That looks so good. Like, that's beautiful. Like, how did you do that? Like, oh, where'd you get these titles? Oh, how'd you do this? How'd you do that? Like, he's starting to, you know, compliment me on my video editing techniques and stuff, and I was like, kind of laughed a little bit. I was like, well, it's all Final Cut Pro X, man. It's all like plugins and stuff. Like, they've really dressed it up to where it now, aside from sharing projects with people, just in terms of individual filmmaking, it's really, really hard to beat. And Griffin Hammond, who's a filmmaker, he's a Panasonic guy. He is, you know, he uses Final Cut Pro X exclusively and, you know, doesn't make any apology about it. And it used to be where, like, you know, everybody would kind of look down their nose at you if you're using Final Cut Pro X because it's like, oh, that's for Gumbies and amateurs. But the truth is, whatever enables you to make good work that you're proud of, then, you know, like, you take the next step when you need it. And like, if I was in an environment where I was either trying to get a job where I was working as part of a production team, in that sort of environment, then yeah, I would totally learn how to use Premiere. Final Cut Express is a good editor. That's a track-based editor and a good one. Oh, okay, so Final Cut Express is not Final Cut Pro X. I must have gotten confused there, but I have never used Final Cut Express. But and maybe, Steve, maybe you and Queen can connect, and you might be able to help her out with that more so than I can, because I've never used Final Cut Pro or Final Cut Express. And you know, my big thing is just go out there and do it. Go out there and do it. Do the work. Just don't worry about if your stuff is difficult or if it's not good. You know, just make stuff, because that's how you're going to get better. Just getting out there and making stuff is the biggest key, and it's the hardest thing to do because, you know, usually what gets us into any sort of creative field is seeing pictures or videos from people that are experts at their craft, and we don't go back and look at their scrap paper and their scratch books and like all the throwaway stuff that they made when they started, because, you know, you just saw it, you know, 20 years into their career and you're like, oh, this is awesome. You know, so it's important to just get out there and really embrace the learning curve and do that work. And I guarantee you that once you get the basics nailed down, that will make a huge difference in your editing and your confidence. And then once you start to see your editing like getting better and faster, and like you're starting to kind of time stuff to music, and you can make these little sequences that are, you know, sound good and look nice, and you're proud of yourself, then it's like, oh man, I want to make more videos. And then your channel about being a female auto mechanic is going to crush, because that is like that's a good thing. What kind of car how-to video would you guys want to see? Asks Queen of San Joaquin. I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. There's a whole. What I would actually do as a starting point is I would say go on YouTube and look at other mechanics channels. Look at what they do. Look at ones that are very like narrative and like boring, like instructional. Not to say that instructional is bad, because how-to stuff like camera reviews, right? Like how-to stuff gets search traffic and makes people aware of you. But I think if you find a balance between, selling or sharing your life or branding your life as a female auto mechanic, and like, this is what I'm doing, and like, this is my day, and like working on cars as part of my day, and but like also kind of the personal inside, so it's not just like this is how you change brakes or what have you. Because that can get very monotone, and some channels do really well with that. Like all they are is instructional videos, tutorials, like how to do this, how to do that. That's all they do. And if you do it well, that can kill it. But to me, that there's a lot of variety, I think, that you can mix into it, where you have a certain amount of stuff that's relational, that's personal, that's philosophical, even that's talking about bigger issues of how people perceive you because you're a female and a mechanic, and like how that's how that's impacted you. And I think there's a lot of discussion that could happen around that. And there's also a lot of instructional value that I think a lot of people would come for too, because like there's a handful of people that have come to my channel for the video reviews or the reviews of the cameras, and they stay for other things because, well, there's more to it than just camera reviews, right? But the camera reviews, how they find you, and then they stay for the personal stuff that you deliver. So I think that what I would do is just get an idea of what's out there. Look at the stuff you hate. Look at the stuff you love. Think about why. And, make some videos that you'd like to watch. Some videos that you're proud of, that you're like, dude, this stuff is badass. Even if nobody watches this, or if I don't get a pat on the back from, whoever on YouTube, like, this is something I'm excited about. And when you have that, I can guarantee you that it's going to be, and when you have that and you do that stuff consistently, because that's another big part of it, is like doing it consistently, where people can count on you to have that type of content, then I think there's a lot of opportunity to bring a lot of different people in, and I don't know that a lot of people know what kind of how-to video they want to see for a car. Like, I can't think of a video that's like, I want to learn how to do this on a car. Can you please show me how to do that? But I bet that you can make a video that I would watch just because you're being yourself and it's kind of interesting, and I've never seen a girl work on a car before, and like, it's like it's a different thing that I haven't seen, and I want to hear from you as a person, and I think that that's really where the selling point comes in, more so, at least for me, because I kind of, if I'm asking, if you're asking from a standpoint of like what would do well on the internet, I would say, if you can think of the top 5 most common things that go wrong with people's cars, that are like the most ubiquitous problems that people have with their vehicles, I would do a how-to, like how to change a tire, how to rotate tires, maybe how to balance tires, how to check the oil. I mean, or just do some basic maintenance for a car. Like, what are the basic things that you would do on a weekly basis? What would you do every week on your car? Yeah, I mean, use the fact that Queen says, wow, I didn't realize how interesting this was. I'm usually frustrated about it because I'm a professional and I can't get hired. I think the thing is that you have to just find your market. And there definitely is a market that would see you as a specialty that would probably pay more and go out of their way to have you work on their cars and give them instruction. I mean, hell, you could do seminars, like you could do women's workshops where, like in San Francisco and like all these areas that are very much like, you know, kind of forward thinking, like what they need and what they would want and what they never realized they wanted until you package this and sell it to them, is a women's weekend retreat where they get together, you rent an auto shop, and everybody's turning wrenches and everybody's learning to do these 5 basic skills. You're going to learn how to change a tire. You're going to learn how to change oil. You're going to learn how to rotate tires. You're going to learn how to, you know, I don't know, brakes, pads, rotors. See, I don't know for I'm not good with cars. I'm not the guy, see? So, I mean, hell, I would come to one of your workshops if I could afford it by the time you get that big, and you're going to be like off the charts with it. But like seriously, there are people who come and pay hundreds of dollars for a weekend to go pull weeds in a garden all day because like ecotourism, because there are people who have completely detached from that type of experience, who have no idea how to do that, that would watch your channel and be like, dude, that's awesome. I want to do that. Like, I've watched enough of these videos because I accidentally got a flat the other day and I thought, I don't want to be stranded again. Like, maybe this video came up for me on YouTube and, you know, hell, I'm a executive at Google, or like I work for Uber or whatever. Like, you know, the people that have money, and that to them it would be kind of a fun thing to learn how to do some work on their car. That, I mean, who else are they going to ask? Where else are they going to go? Like, they're going to go to their local mechanic and be like, excuse me, Mo, can you like teach me how to change a tire? And the guy, you know, like, nobody offers that. But how cool would that be to have something that's specifically tailored, you know, like, if I had the money for it, like, I would totally send my daughter to, you know, some sort of a camp where she's going to learn practical skills that would help her as a human being. Because at the end of the day, everybody, you know, learns how to do all the stuff that they don't really need to learn how to do, like how to find the top 5 hashtags for Instagram. Like, who gives a shit about that? Like, that doesn't improve anyone's life. I mean, maybe it does on some level, arguably, but compared to, like, yeah, I want my daughter to know how to change a flat tire. I want my daughter to know how to handle a firearm. I want my daughter to know how to, you know, hammer a nail straight and how to throw somebody's head on the ground, because I want her to be strong and independent. And I mean, I'm actually, believe it or not, I'm fairly, I'm not, you know, a big social justice warrior myself, but I do believe in equality. You know, like, I hold the same standards for my daughter that I would hold if I had a son, and vice versa. And to me, it's not about, like, you know, special snowflake and you know, all the negative stuff that comes along with that, or what I perceive as being negative, and the touchy-feely, warm, fuzzy stuff. But it's really about saying, look, like, be a useful person. And if you can't help yourself when you're in need, then you're like asking for trouble, you know. And whether that's mechanics, whether that's construction, like, they're basic levels of things that, you know, everybody needs. And I think that everybody in our society today is highly undervaluing. You know, that's one thing. Like, you know, in other countries, like in Europe, you go over there and people, there is a pathway to a full-time living and a prosperous income in whatever it is that you want to do. It's not like over here where it's like, oh, the people that cut our grass, those are from people from, you know, that they can't make it in as an executive, or like these people are less than. Like, that whole mindset is a very American thing, where it's like you're expected to have the corner office, you know. And you know, it's actually, the truth is that, you know, the people that cut our grass and the people that, you know, run the corporations, we need that. You know, some of the most important people in my life are the guys at the deli where I go every other day, because those guys know exactly what I need, and they keep me supplied with the food that I eat, and I would be screwed without them. Like, I don't want just some, like, dumbass behind the counter there. I want somebody who's excellent at their job, and I want them to be paid enough to the point and trained enough to really have the passion for what they're doing, rather than saying, no, Johnny, like, you could make an excellent butcher because that's something you're really interested in, or Sally, or what have you, of course, right? But, like, you could make an excellent butcher, but no, you have to go to college for business management, because if you don't work in a corporate environment somewhere, you're not worth anything, or you're not as good or smart or living up to your potential. But the reality is that, like, people need to do the things that they're gifted in and that their heart goes towards, because they're going to be the best at those things. And for you, it's it seems, or I would hope, that it's auto mechanics. Since you are a professional mechanic, I would hope that you're doing something that you feel that passionately inclined about. But I think just for the good of society as a whole, even beyond, like, gender disparity, right, is, like, people need to learn how to do stuff, because people think that everything that needs to happen in their life can happen with an iPhone, and that's not, that is not the case. And Queen, you say, it's funny how mechanics are looked down on as grease monkeys, but in quotes, but it's a very important job. You are 100% correct. The most important people in my life, especially when I need them, are, like, doctors and mechanics. Those are people where, like, I have tremendous amount of appreciation for the talent and the gifts that those people share, and especially when you find people that work in that profession that really take it seriously, care about their work, and that are honest. And instead of, like, always pushing the people who have the lowest ability and the lowest drive and the lowest intelligence, not saying that always happens, but it's, like, usually that the way that we look at it is, like, oh, if you seem like you're not good at anything else, we're going to say, oh, well, you can always go and be a fill in the blank, some sort of laborer or tradesperson that works with their hands, as though that's a lesser calling. And the truth is, we should be getting the best and the brightest people to work with their hands, because we need that. Like, we don't just want to have that be something that's looked down upon. Plumbers, yeah, boy, you're not kidding. Plumbers, and plumbers make hella good money too, because you call them in the middle of the night, when you don't have any hot water, or same thing even with an electrician. They're worth their weight in gold. And I think there is going to be a point when there's going to be a reversal in the market, and frankly, that's part of the reason why I'm interested in logging. It's not two people, like my brother and I, both being educated, and I would like to think reasonably intelligent. We're not just brush apes, as it were. We're fairly articulate people. Like, there should be room for those types of people to go out and to work with their hands, because they're going to be able to do a better job and to do it safer. Christopher Holiday says, got to go, check back in later. I didn't even know you were here, Christopher, but I'm glad you were. I thank you for joining. And awesome. Take care, and we'll see you next week, or if I'm still on here ranting a little bit later. But Mad props to the plumbers of the world, says Queen of San Joaquin. Could not agree more. But I think there's one of the ideas that I had for a documentary project that I want to do is something really dealing with the idea of how there is a stigma that goes along with people who work with their hands, and, like, just looking into that and just showing the world people who work with their hands, who are brilliant people, who choose to work with their hands, not because they are less ambitious, but because they recognize the value of real things that you can make and that you can fix and that you can do with their hands, and that they were not deterred from taking that kind of a path based on the stereotypes that it's like, oh, well, if you're a grease monkey or you're a brush ape, or all these pejorative terms that go along with laboring. And frankly, I told my brother, and I believe very strongly in this, and I know nobody the two of you who are watching, I think I can trust you, one of you, not to go and poach this idea. And I'm fairly certain that nobody else is going to watch 94 minutes of my live stream to get to this point. But I just thought it was hilarious, the term that people use for loggers, brush apes. And every time I hear that, it makes me laugh a little bit. So I was like, we should start a YouTube channel called Brush Apes and have it be like just about us logging and shit. And just, that would be really fun. So that might happen at some point, sort of a different, tributary of the whole like documentary thing. But still would involve working with one's hands. Anyways, it's been 94, almost 95 minutes of me going on, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to keep this kind of short tonight. I'm not going to go on for a super long time, and, well, here we are, hour and a half later. I've really enjoyed this. Why do they call them brush apes? Well, it's kind of like knuckle draggers, like they call snowboarders or skateboarders brush apes. They're kind of like guys that are just dragging around in the brush, cutting down trees and schlepping brush all over the place, but they're apes because they're kind of considered less intelligent. They're not they're not arborists or something that sounds a little bit more classy. It's a pejorative. It's like the equivalent of grease monkey in the tree cutting world is brush ape. And there probably are more names besides that, but that was one of the ones that he mentioned to me, and I thought was hilarious. And I was like, yeah, I want to be a brush ape. That sounds great. I resemble that remark because I do have very long arms. I'm proportioned a little. I was built for some sort of simian, as a simian archetype, if you will. But yeah, so 96 minutes, and I'm down to answer any remaining questions that anybody has, and if there are none, I am going to start signing off for the evening. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this, whether you watch the whole thing or bits and pieces. And if you haven't done so already, please make sure to subscribe to this Living Vertical channel, because we're all about exploring light, fast, minimalistic storytelling with a camera to take ownership of our story just by getting out there and telling it. Until the next video, until the next live stream every Friday at 5. Oh, this is madebyhand.com, good storytelling. Thank you, Steve, for that tip. I'm just in the process of signing off. If you have any questions, any last minute things to add, because I'm gonna kind of wrap it up here after 97 minutes. You are very welcome for the encouragement, Queen of San Joaquin. We will check in next week, and I want to hear all about your progress because you're going to crush it, I know, and I'm excited to watch that happen. It's really good things. And Steve, thank you for your input on everything tonight, and always have a lot of insightful commentary to add. And where two Steves are gathered together, things have to be. We got to have great minds happening, good things happening there. So, all right, guys, next Friday, sometime after 8 p.m., sometime between 8 p.m. and midnight Eastern time. I wish I could be more specific about when exactly I'm going to hop on and do a live stream, but I got a 3-year-old, and I'm living in a closet here, so I have to be mindful of everybody, and that's when we will see you guys next. Thank you so much for watching, and we will catch you on the next episode.